Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 688. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about seafood and beaches and a seafood museum and the world's most expensive Waffle House as we go to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Mississippi's Gulf Coast. I'd like to welcome the show Charles McCool from McCoolTravel.com. And Charles has come to talk to us about coastal Mississippi. Charles, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. How you doing today?
I'm doing well, and we're talking about the state of Mississippi. What is your connection with coastal Mississippi?
As a travel writer, I have visited coastal Mississippi a few times over the past 2 years. And after going there 3 or 4 times, I decided that I loved that area and other parts of the U.S. Gulf Coast so much that I developed a new brand called U.S. Gulf Coast, which covers everything from Key West to South Padre. But we are talking only about coastal Mississippi today. So as a travel writer, I covered it several times.
Excellent. And why should someone go to coastal Mississippi?
Well, we'll talk about many things, but it is unique, a unique destination in the United States. It has the longest continuous beach in the United States, which I think a lot of people don't know. I love road trips. I travel all over the world and just love driving. And there's this sense of soul fulfillment when I drive on the Mississippi Gulf Coast where it's just different than anywhere else. You can drive for an hour and not see anything except for the sand in the water. It's unobstructed by condos and buildings and restaurants and what have you. So just this great peace and calm and different than anywhere else.
Excellent. And what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
It's not a singular destination. There are many communities there. So I'm going to recommend some things to do in each of the communities along the coastal Mississippi. It's also called the Mississippi Gulf Coast. So I'm going to use both terms interchangeably. I don't want you to drive 50 miles in one day for lunch and then go drive 50 miles back. So I will concentrate on the various communities and say, all right, first day you're going to be here, second day you're going to be here, and then so on. And we can do a 3, 4, 5, 7-day itinerary.
Well, let's get into it. Where are you going to start us?
Let's start in Pascagoula. So Mississippi is between Alabama and Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
So coastal Mississippi represents the entire Mississippi Gulf Coast. So over on the east side, closest to Alabama, if you're driving from Mobile, the first thing you're going to hit is Pascagoula. The city is probably most famous because it's where Jimmy Buffett was born.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yeah, so if that's going to set the expectations for what the coastal Mississippi area is all about, I think Jimmy Buffett was born there. So we're already at our 5 o'clock somewhere attitude. Pascagoula is also a Navy base, so there's a lot of military and also industry going on there. But it's a seafaring community. It's laid back relative to some of the other cities we'll talk about.
Well, what are we going to do in Pascagoula?
One of the things that happened in Pascagoula that is, I guess, lesser known is that one of the biggest UFO abduction stories in U.S. history happened there. So back in the 70s, a couple of people claimed that they were abducted by UFO, and so they were never disproven. So that's one of the most famous things that happened in Pascagoula.
Okay, but other than being abducted by aliens, what am I going to do in Pascagoula? If we want to narrow it down here just a little bit.
The oldest house in Mississippi is in Pascagoula.
Okay.
It's called the LaPointe Krebs House and Museum. So I went there a couple months ago, and I was fascinated by how they showed the construction of how a house was done in I believe it was the 1720s this house was built. How they used the fur and the hair from animals as insulation in the house and things like that. Kind of interesting.
1757. Is there anything specific we're going to do at the Krebs house? We're going to go tour the Krebs house.
You could probably spend a couple of hours there. It's in a nice waterfront setting, and you can get some history of the natives that lived in the area, and then European settlers came in, and so a whole history of Mississippi. But the main point there is to see the house, and the oldest house in the Mississippi Delta region. I think between Minnesota and the Gulf of Mexico, it's the oldest house that's still in the American frontier.
I'm thinking New Orleans would be older than that, but
I mean, the city might be, but I'm not sure if there's a structure that's older than that.
Good point. The city is older, but I don't know if there are any of the original houses. Okay, fair enough.
Another thing that I really loved in Pascagoula is the Audubon Center. I believe the official name is the Pascagoula River Audubon Center. Captain McCoy, no relation, I'm McCool, and there's a guy named Captain McCoy, and he runs nature trips out of the Pascagoula River Audubon Center. And what I loved about it is that I learned things, obviously, like you learn on most trips, but the Pascagoula River is the longest, and I'm not going to get the terminology right. It's the longest undammed river in the continental United States.
Huh.
Yeah, so I was fascinated by that. And I was like, whoa, what about this river? And they were like, no, it was dammed at some point. So the Pascagoula River, I believe, is 480 miles. That is natural, the way it's always been. So it hasn't been dammed. It hasn't been obstructed by any kind of construction. So you can see wildlife and nature the way that it was several hundred years ago.
Well,
something you didn't expect to find in coastal Mississippi or anywhere else.
And you say wildlife. I'm picturing we're talking marshes, birds, alligators, that sort of thing. Am I in the right ballpark?
You're right. And one thing that's dominant in this area are the Mississippi sandhill cranes, which are a relatively large bird. And I'm sure they're in other parts of the United States, but there is a sandhill crane refuge that not in Pascagoula, but on the other side. So I-10 cuts through the area. So from Mobile to New Orleans, you would drive I-10. Coastal Mississippi, I'm talking about everything south of I-10.
Okay.
North of I-10, the Pascagoula River would go up there, and that's where the Sandhill Crane Refuge is. But of course, the birds don't recognize boundaries. They fly all over the place. So you can see those on the riverboat tour.
Okay.
The Audubon Center is like most centers. They want to promote the natural wildlife. and the scenery and that's so forth. And it's a hidden gem, I think, that most people don't recognize.
Well, and because it has the name Audubon on it, I'm assuming we're predominantly talking about bird life.
Predominantly so, yes, sir.
Okay. I don't know if everybody knows. I mean, Audubon as a charity, I think, is well known. But Google Audubon, you'll find, what is it, James Audubon? Is that the original one who did all the original drawings of birds in the early U.S.?
That's right. And he did watercolors, these fascinating, realistic sketches, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned Captain McCoy. So you could take his cruise out of the Audubon Center, but you can also rent your own kayak. And I did that one time. And going at your own pace around the marshes, fascinating. At least a dozen gators. And as they got close, they would just scatter into the water. So I love doing that at my own pace, too.
Excellent. And John James Audubon, I got it almost right there.
John James. Okay.
When I said early, I didn't realize how early he was. He was born in 1785. And so he was basically drawing birds up until about the Mexican-American War in the U.S. And so as the frontiers were being filled in, he was out there with his sketch pad.
Wow. In Pascagoula, there's obviously the Jimmy Buffett stuff, too. The native son, I think his family left when he was 3, and then he grew up in Mobile. But he has come back and he recognizes Pascagoula as his birthplace. So there is a beach and a bridge, and his childhood home are all named for Jimmy Buffett. So the parrot heads can go and pay pilgrimage to Jimmy Buffett and go visit some of those sites. And one of my favorite places to eat in Pascagoula is called Bozo's Grocery. It's a very old school from the 1950s. Place where you go in, you place your order, and you wait. So I've been there 2 or 3 times. The last time I went kayaking at the River Audubon Center, in fact, I got a takeout po' boy from Bozo's Grocery and then took it on the kayak. But it's this old school place where you go in and you place your order and you order off the menu. You don't make up stuff. And there was some guy in front of me that was I was a visitor and he wasn't a local either. And so he went and he's like, "Oh, can I make this substitution?" And they're like, "No, you order what's on the menu." And I was like, damn. Basically, your choices are, you get a po' boy. You want a shrimp po' boy, you want an oyster po' boy.
And a po' boy being a sandwich, a sub someplace else, or a hoagie or a hero, depending on where you're from, but a po' boy in this region of the world. Okay. And shrimp being the best known one that I know.
They're also known for their fried oyster po' boys. So
okay,
I got a half and half, and it's amazing. I've had, I don't know, a couple dozen po' boys along the U.S. Gulf Coast, and it's one of the better ones. So I totally recommend going to Bozo Groceries to get a takeout to go kayaking or to eat in.
Excellent. Anything else that we want to do in Pascagoula, or shall we move on?
We can move on. There's a section of Pascagoula, and I think it may be its own town, but I consider it part of Pascagoula. It's called Moss Point. And in Moss Point, there are some gorgeous, hundreds of years old oaks, these live oaks that represent the South to a lot of people. They're all over this little section of town called Moss Point. I love driving around there, and it's along the marsh fronts, and you find wonderful oak alleys and oak trees. So I recommend that as a place along the old Spanish Trail, which I don't know if you've heard of the old Spanish Trail. It's a trail that goes from Jacksonville, I believe, to Santa Fe. I would recommend maybe spending a day there and doing some of those things that I just hit upon. There's a lighthouse that's right at the bridge when you're coming from the west. So if you're coming from the other part of coastal Mississippi, you'll see a lighthouse. You can climb that certain days and times. I love seeing the different oaks around there. You could do a couple little scenic drives, but some of the other towns we're going to talk about later, we'd spend more than one day at. But here, maybe an overnight, maybe the day trip, depending on what your itinerary is.
Okay. Where to next?
As we're heading west, the next town of significance we'll hit is called Ocean Springs, and it is simply one of my favorite towns probably in the world. It has a Key West vibe. It has a Carmel vibe. I know you're from California.
Mm-hmm. So you say Key West vibe, I think Party Town. You say Carmel vibe. That's a very, very different vibe. That's a wine sipping, and I love Carmel, but slightly pretentious. This is the place where people got in trouble for having ice cream out on the street corners and things like that. So real fan there. So I don't know how you mix those two.
Well, you know me, I'm eclectic. So if Key West and Carmel had a baby, it's Ocean Springs. Quote me on that.
Okay, you've got to explain what that means.
So Ocean Springs, Mississippi, it's a quintessential Southern town. It's very romantic. It has a main street called Washington Avenue, and it's dripping with those 100-year-old oaks with a little bit of moss on it or air
moss,
plants. Yeah, and so much so that they're cracking the sidewalks. The sidewalks are uneven because of the roots of these oak trees. It's a very artistic community. So you'll find art galleries downtown. The Anderson family is very prominent in this area, and Walter Anderson was a preeminent artist from the 1930s through the 60s, I believe, much so that he hosted William Faulkner and people like that. They would come there to do retreats in Ocean Springs. There was also his brother Peter Anderson, who was a very prominent potter. So it's the vibe is very artistic and very festival oriented.
Okay.
And when you go across the bridge from Ocean Springs it's called Biloxi Bay, then you go into Biloxi, and so you get the casinos and big city, if you will. So this is the stepsister counterpart to the big city, like Carmel is to Monterey or Key West is to Miami. That's why I make these parallels. You're not going to find a lot of chain restaurants in Ocean Springs. You're going to find a lot of fantastic chefs running their own restaurants and things like that.
Okay. Anything else we're going to do in Ocean Springs?
There's some history I want to talk about. I think it was about 8 years ago, someone found Al Capone's wallet in one of the bayous in Ocean Springs.
Was it Geraldo Rivera, possibly?
Just some guy fishing.
Okay.
There's a lot of bridges and bayous and things like that. And so someone was fishing or crabbing and pulled up Al Capone's wallet. So this was one of his hideouts, and you'll do your Google fact checking, but 30s, 50s, I don't know exactly when.
He would be in the 1920s, probably. During Prohibition. Prohibition started 20 years ago, almost to the day. It started in 2020 and lasted until 1933. That I don't have to Google for.
So Al Capone hung out there. There's an inn. I don't even want to call it a hotel, but it's a 12-room inn, and it's called The Roost in Ocean Springs. But Architectural Digest named it the best designed hotel in the South United States a couple years ago. So when it opened, it's the phenomenal accolade that it got, but it's the beautiful, beautiful inn. And the connection to Al Capone is that they have a speakeasy type bar like a lot of places are having, and it's designed with Al Capone murals and themes and so forth. But it's also a phenomenal bar with craft cocktails and so forth like that. So that place is called The Roost, and I love staying there. That's one of the places I like in Ocean Springs.
Okay.
Another historical throwback is a place called Gulf Hills, Gulf, Gulf. It also has a golf course and a conference center, but it's where Elvis hung out in the summers of, I believe the years were 1951 to 57. So every summer, Elvis retreated to this one hotel, and he stayed there for the entire summer with his entourage. And I was very fortunate to stay in the suite that he stayed in a couple of months ago. And they don't have the rights to use his name, so they call it the Love Me Tender, Love Me Suite. It's a 3-bedroom hotel suite, and it's on top of the lobby and the registration area at this golf course and hotel and conference center. So there are 3 bedrooms, 4 baths, a wet bar, a living room, and it's all designed with Elvis memorabilia and pictures of when he stayed there and gold record replicas and things like that. So that's a couple of historical things about Ocean Springs. Also, I believe this place, Golf Hills, was the site of the very first ladies' professional golf tournament. I remember reading that somewhere.
Okay.
So I just mentioned two places you could stay at. You can stay in the Love Me Tender, Love Me Sweet. If you happen to be traveling with an entourage of people, you could stay there. The Roost is another great property. And there's two other properties I really love staying at in Ocean Springs. And one is right on Washington Avenue, that downtown that I mentioned, and it's called the Inn at Ocean Springs. It's a very, very small boutique hotel. They only have 2 suites, but it's right there in the heart of downtown. And one suite is closer to the main street of Washington, and then one is set back. So depending on which suite you stay in, you're 2 steps from the main street or you're 10 steps from the main street. But that property is elegantly designed, and it's actually a sister property of the Roost. So the same people manage it, and they're both very architecturally significant and popular and romantic.
All right.
Ocean Springs, I would probably recommend someone stay there for 2 or 3 nights. The Walter Anderson Museum is right there in downtown. It's 14 steps from the inn that I talked about. And you can go there and see the works of Walter Anderson, who's the artist that I mentioned before, and one of the local heroes. It's really a fascinating art museum. Visit some of the shops that are along the street. It's probably about a quarter to a half mile to get to the waterfront. So when you're at the waterfront, then you have amazing sunsets and sunrises. There's a couple of outfits in town that will rent kayaks or sup so you can get out on the water. You want to talk about restaurants?
Sure.
One of my favorite restaurants in the United States is called Vestige. So it's Vestige, and it's right there in Ocean Springs. The chef is named Alex Perry, Perry, and he was nominated last year for a James Beard Award for Best Chef in the South or Southeastern United States. I don't know how their categories exactly work.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
He's one of those chefs that really pushes the envelope, trying ingredients. He's married to a Japanese woman, so he's always bringing in international spices and flavors and things like that. And his restaurant's been there about 5 years. So he admitted the first year, I'm just surviving and trying to get people to recognize who I am. And then year 2, year 3, trying different things. He's like, now I'm just going to I'm going to do whatever I can to shock people and throw things out there and see what they'll accept. So it's truly one of the most innovative places I've been to in the United States.
And when you say innovative, what kind of things did you have that were innovative?
Where you were expecting something savory, there might be a sweet thing in there, or he would be introducing some spices and you wouldn't recognize what it is. And you know that he has a Japanese wife, and so you assume this is some far Eastern Asian spice. He's like, oh no, it's something that is from Iran or some Persian spice that he picked up somewhere. You don't expect to find this in the Southeastern United States, and definitely not in Mississippi. So he's just bringing flavors and concepts that are unexpected.
No, honestly, I would say in this region of the world, I expect fried.
And that's a reasonable expectation. Shrimp and grits are something that every restaurant's going to have, and everyone's going to have a different take on it.
And it's good, too.
Exactly. You'd be crazy to go to coastal Mississippi and not have shrimp.
Sure.
It's amazing everywhere. And oysters are fresh from right out there in the Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
He'll do that, but he'll also get the fresh produce and proteins from other places. It's a phenomenal restaurant. And I know the last time I was there, people were coming down from Montgomery, Alabama, and Mobile and Jackson just to eat at his restaurant. So it was something that impressed me.
Excellent. Before we go on, the Old Spanish Trail. I didn't lose track of that. The Old Spanish Trail wasn't really a trail in the time of the Spanish conquistadors. There was no existing trail, which I wondered about. But this is a trail that links up some of the old Spanish possessions. And so it goes, as you said, from St. Augustine, Florida, all the way. And I think you said Santa Fe. It actually goes all the way to San Diego.
So San Diego, that's coast to coast right there.
But again, not really one that the old Spanish conquistadors would have traveled. There is a Spanish trail that they did travel. It goes from Santa Fe down to San Diego. That was an existing route, but not so much from St. Augustine all the way over to this part of the world.
Nice. A couple more things I'm thinking about for Ocean Springs. One is a biscuit place. I mean, when you're going to the south, you're thinking biscuits, or you should be at least. We mentioned shrimp and grits, but biscuits are something that a lot of restaurants have. And there's a place called Greenhouse on Porter. And Porter is the name of a street in Ocean Springs. But it's a greenhouse that is an actual greenhouse. And this restaurant has a different sweet and savory biscuit every day. You can literally go there every day and have something different. It's really phenomenal. And they just concluded, every year they do a tournament, just like NCAA basketball tournament, where they start with 64 biscuits. And every Thursday they have a vote, and people vote on which biscuit's best. And last week they had the final two and selected a winner of their grand prize biscuit for the year.
And what biscuit won for the year, do you know?
I don't know. I know a friend of mine from the area had her biscuit in the semifinals, and I think she did.
Oh, so these are ones that people are submitting, not just...
These are the residents, the visitors. People online will submit their recipes, and they make them, I believe, every Thursday for 10 weeks. They'll have this tournament. I mean, you can go there any day and order their sweet and savory biscuit. They have craft teas and coffees and things like that. But I mean, the biscuits are the stars. So that's a place that I really love for breakfast and even lunch if you get up a little bit later. Ocean Springs is the headquarters of I believe it's called the Gulf Islands National Seashore.
Okay.
It's part of the national park system.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a string of barrier islands along that part of the Gulf, and so it extends into Florida, and I think it skips Alabama. So off the coast of Pensacola, there's some Gulf island. I know, like, oh. So off the coast of Pensacola and Destin, there's part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, and then there's some barrier islands in Mississippi. And so the headquarters is there in Ocean Springs. You could spend days there if you're really into national parks, hiking and kayaking and visiting the visitor center and then going out to the barrier islands.
So now, are there regular boat rides that go out to, I see, Deer Island, for instance, right off the coast there? And do I go hiking out on the islands or kayak out to them, or what is the plan here? They're like 5 miles offshore.
That's right. So I did go to Deer Island in October. It was the last ferry of the year, I believe, that I was on.
Okay.
I was on a charter. But there were people that went out earlier. I believe at 10 o'clock they go out, and it takes about an hour to get there. And then there's, say, 3 o'clock it comes back. So you can spend a couple of hours out there. Pristine beaches.
Got it.
Beaches on the mainland are really, really nice. But when you go out there, they're different beaches. They're pristine, but also natural. I found a pelican beak.
Oh.
Skeleton, if you will.
Uh-huh.
Last time I was out there. So you may not find that on the mainland beaches, but out there you don't see the litter and the things like that you may see on other beaches, but you also see things that are coming in from the Gulf, because that is the barrier to the mainland. There are national park shuttles that go out there. There are private boats that'll take you out there. You can go out there yourself. That artist that I mentioned, Walter Anderson, he actually lived on Deer Island for part of the year. So he would go out there on his rowboat for his meditation and Zen and inspiration for a few months, and then he would create art based on his stay out there.
Well, and I said 5 miles offshore. Deer Island's only a mile offshore, so that in a rowboat is a little less daunting.
Absolutely. I can't remember all the names of the islands.
Deer Island, Horn Island, Petit Bois Island, Ship Island.
Mm-hmm. Ship Island, I believe, is the one that Walter Anderson went to.
Got it. With Fort Massachusetts on Ship Island. Looks like an old World War II, with Civil War fort, brick fort.
I believe it was pre-Civil War, and then it was used in the Civil War, and then it was retrofitted for various wars.
We can assume that it wasn't the Confederates that built a fort called Fort Massachusetts.
You can assume that. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's a series of forts like Dry Tortugas there off Key West that were built after the War of 1812 to try and protect the U.S. coast.
That's exactly what I remember. Yeah, it was built in the 20s or 30s or even later. But yeah, that totally makes sense. One of my last visits there, I stumbled upon my affinity for these live oak trees that are all over the southern United States. I discovered two places in Ocean Springs. One is called Ruskin Oak, Ruskin, Ruskin Oak. And they believe that is the largest oak or the oldest oak in Mississippi outside of the Friendship Oak, which we could talk about later. But they think it's 350 years old and it's on private property. But you can walk on Ruskin Street and take a look at it and take pictures and so forth. There's also an area of Ocean Springs called Lover's Lane, and it's dripping with these old, hundreds of years old oaks, and really nice area. I think even people that go to Ocean Springs all the time and know about it don't know about this little area called Lover's Lane. So that's what I call one of my hidden gems of the area.
Okay. What else?
We can move on if you want. I'm sure, I'll regret not listening to everything I can think of in Ocean Springs.
In terms of things to do, I want to emphasize a little more things to do, because we've talked about places to eat and places to stay and the beach. Are there other things that I'm doing during the day?
The National Seashore that I talked about.
Okay.
Ocean Springs is a good place to be because you're right across the bridge from Biloxi. So you can go over there to visit their museums and things to do that we'll talk about later. So if you want to stay in Ocean Springs as your base to go visit, say, Pascagoula and Biloxi, that's well worth it too. Other things to do in Ocean Springs, kayaking the bayous. They have a pretty good bicycle system through town so that you could either bring your own bike or rent a bike and then explore the old Spanish Trail that we talked about, which does parallel a lot of their bike trails that they have established.
Okay. Excellent. Well, then you wanted to get us to Biloxi. And this is the beginning of the longest beach that you were talking about.
That is correct. You must have looked that up.
Well, I know. I was just guessing from the map. There were only certain places that they could have been.
I believe the beach is man-made, and I kind of kill myself that I don't know that. It's kind of like Waikiki Beach in Hawaii, where it's a man-made beach. It wasn't there originally. But the Army Corps or someone built this beach, and I think it's 27 continuous miles.
Oh, nope. Sorry. That's the longest beach. The longest beach is not there. It's on the Pacific Ocean.
Oh, no. Which one?
No, sorry. That's the longest drivable beach. Never mind.
Okay.
Virginia Beach, though, is longer in Virginia.
You see, since I live in Virginia, I should know that. But believe me, Virginia Beach has a lot of building on the ocean side. So you can't drive and have unobstructed views of the ocean, where you can along coastal Mississippi. And that's what I love.
Got it.
If the weather's nice and you have a nice convertible, pop down the top and you could drive for an hour and crank your head to the left or right and you're looking at ocean the whole time. And people say go to Destin, go over to Panama City Beach, go over to Florida, but it is so built up with condos and everything. The beaches are gorgeous. No doubt about it. And the water is fantastic there, but it's so built up that, you're fighting the traffic and it's hard to find parking. And what I love about coastal Mississippi is that the building's not there on the beach. So you can do this drive for a whole hour and not even see a building. Nothing's blocking your view. And so I think that's just a phenomenal thing that most people don't realize. You can park without paying right on the ocean and put your feet out on the sand. Here, I live in D.C., and once winter hits, I've done this a couple times over the last couple of years. I catch a flight at 6:30 in the morning, and by 10:30, my feet are in the sand. I can't tell you how rejuvenating that is in February to leave 20-degree temperature and to have my feet in 70-degree sand in 4 hours. It's phenomenal. I think most people go to the area, coastal Mississippi and Biloxi, because of the casinos, and there's no doubt about it. That drives tourism there. And I think I read a study one time that 45% or 47% of the people that go to coastal Mississippi are in the casino. That's fine. They embrace that. and it is a casino culture. But there are a lot of things to do in Biloxi outside the casinos.
Excellent. Like what?
I have a food mentality, so
I've noticed this.
I'm going to go back to, I'm going to start with food and then see if I can remember everything.
We should say I've known Charles for a long time. We actually used to work together in a former life way back in the 1990s at Apple Computers. So this doesn't come as a surprise to me.
So Biloxi, I mentioned the restaurant Vestige in Ocean Springs, and I love the chef there. There's a chef in Biloxi, and his name is Austin Sumrall, Sumrall, and he's the chef owner of a restaurant called White Pillars. And that's probably my second favorite restaurant, along the entire U.S. Gulf Coast.
Okay.
I think he's also a phenomenal chef. He wasn't nominated for a James Beard Award, but whatever. He embraces the seafood from the Gulf Coast, and he works with the local providers of produce and so forth like that. And I just love what he's doing. He prides himself on having the best gumbo in Mississippi and shrimp and grits and things like that. So whenever I go there, I just know I'm having a wonderful meal. Last time I was there, I actually concentrated on the culinary scene, and I talked to the chefs and I talked to a couple of foodie writers. As a travel writer, feel disingenuous when I say I know the best restaurants to eat at. So I feel like I want to talk to the people that really know the scene there. And pretty much everyone I talked to mentioned this one place in Biloxi, which I did go to a few years ago, and it's called Le Bakery. I think it might be called Le Bakery Cafe. It's a Vietnamese bakery.
Okay.
I went there on my very first trip, and it was a great place, and I want to go back there. But the woman that runs that place is named Sue, and she's the daughter of Vietnamese refugees that settled in San Diego. But then they moved to Biloxi because of its seafood heritage. But anyway, she recognized an opportunity to make Vietnamese-style French bread for the fishermen. Everyone raves that she has the best po' boys in the world.
Ah, okay.
She makes banh mi po' boys that knock your socks off. If you wear socks. I mean, I always wear flip-flops when I'm there. But the one time I ate there, I had a coconut curry shrimp banh mi po' boy. That was phenomenal. So that's another food place that I recommend in Biloxi.
Okay.
I could list a few more, but let's maybe move on to some things to do there, right?
Okay.
There's a lighthouse right in the middle of the highway. So the coastal road, I believe, is called Highway 90, but no one calls it that. And when it was built, we don't need to do the fact checking, but I think it was built in the 50s. But they built the road around the lighthouse. So the lighthouse was there. So it's sitting right in the middle of the two sides of the road now. So that's cool itself. And I've climbed lighthouses up and down the coast, and the St. Augustine lighthouse is nice. The ones in Florida are really cool. But this one is cast iron. And you can only climb it until 9:30 in the morning because it gets too hot after that.
Oh, sure. Okay.
They have guided tours at, I think, 9:15, and 9:30 where you can climb to the top of the lighthouse. So it's something that I totally recommend people do. But if you're like me, you lollygag in your hotel, you have your breakfast, you get moving about 10 or 11, it's too late. So if you were visiting coastal Mississippi, I'm like, get your butt out early, go over to the lighthouse, climb up there. Nice views. You can see the beach. You can check out the area, but you need to get there early.
Now, one thing that I saw that I don't know if you've had a chance to do, I see there is a presidential library in Biloxi. Yes, and an American president is just not a U.S., United States of America.
You're driving along the coastal road and you'll see that Jefferson Davis's mansion or house is along there. And I thought it was called Belvoir. So he definitely lived in the area. He wasn't from the area, but he was smart and decided to live there after he became prominent. So he has the home there. And it is something that I want to explore next time I go back there.
Yeah, I believe it was his home actually after the war. And it's Beauvoir.
Okay. One thing that I love in Biloxi, so I talked about the bridge that comes from Ocean Springs. And then as you cross the bridge, then you start encountering the casinos and so forth. But actually, the very first thing you'll see on the right side as you're coming across the bridge, it's a museum of seafood history. And
I saw there was this seafood museum, and I don't know what to make of that. preserved fish sticks or?
I believe the official name is Maritime Industry and Seafood Museum, I believe.
Yep.
So Biloxi was once known as the seafood capital of the world.
Okay.
So still, most of the shrimp that the United States capita eats, I believe, comes from Biloxi. Part of that history is that the seafood industry was evolved or innovated by Vietnamese coming over. So that's why you have this Vietnamese culture there. And then it was taken a step further by Croatians. So if you get into the hidden gems of Biloxi, you start seeing a lot of Vietnamese and Croatian, and then this different fusion with Southern and seafood is just really fascinating to me. But back to that Maritime Museum, it outlines that history. And I believe last year was the 50th anniversary of the Hurricane Camille. Was that the one in 69?
Camille, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so they had displays on that, and there's a new monument in Biloxi for the Hurricane Camille. So that kind of devastated them, as did Katrina later. But the museum, it outlines the seafood history, canned shrimp and oysters back in the day, how the machinery has evolved. And so they have these old-time shrimping machines where they would pile on buckets of shrimp and it would devein them and take the shells off and things like that. So I love the museum for that. And changing channels a little bit, if you go over to the harbor, there are shrimping tours. One of them is just called the shrimping tour. And I can look up the name for you and put that in the notes later. But very entertaining guys will take you out there, and it's very kid friendly. And then they mimic what the shrimpers would do, and then they would pull up the stuff, and then the kids can play with what they pull out of the ocean, which is usually some shrimp and other fish and so forth. So as you come across the bridge, there's that museum. You'll see the casinos. What really floored me the first time that I visited Biloxi in coastal Mississippi are these very weird, very funky buildings that are right across the street from Margaritaville, which is one of the casinos there.
Okay.
And these are these weird shaped silver type things that you would find in the middle of California. So I found out that it's a museum. It's a museum of art called the Orr O'Keefe, and Orr is O-H-R, and it's a guy named George Orr. Back in the day, he was just a very funky artist, I think from the 1880s and 1890s. It was actually designed by Frank Gehry.
Okay.
Not a lot of people go there, but I think it's a very worthwhile place to stop. And near there is the world's most expensive Waffle House.
So someone took a regular Waffle House and just jacked up the prices, is what you're saying.
You mentioned Katrina.
Okay.
So someone said, hey, the world's most expensive Waffle House is right there in downtown Biloxi. And so I had to look into that a little bit more. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So when Katrina hit this area, and so we all know about New Orleans, but the actual direct hit was Biloxi. And I mean, this area was devastated. So all the casinos that you see now and all the buildings along there are new since 2005 because this area was destroyed. But I learned that they call it now the Waffle House Index, where that's how they measure hurricanes along the U.S. Gulf Coast now, because Waffle House will stay open until the last possible second. And then after the hurricane leaves the area, Waffle House is the first thing to open. So Waffle House has endeared themselves to this community. But when the Waffle House was destroyed in Biloxi, they wanted to rebuild. And Biloxi came up with the new rules, like you have to withstand a storm surge of 20 feet or whatever it is. So this Waffle House is built on stilts, it's retrofitted. And so the per square foot cost of building this Waffle House far exceeds any other Waffle House that's ever been built. It's a great trivia thing to visit in Biloxi. The world's most I think the prices are the menu items are the same. It's just that it was the most expensive property that was
Got it. Okay. Excellent. Anything else we want to do in Biloxi, or do we want to move further west?
You can just keep talking about places to eat and things to do in Biloxi. It's a beautiful stretch of beach. Just encourage people just to stop. There's so many pullouts and free places to park. Pick your spot, enjoy the beach.
Do you have a favorite spot to park and enjoy the beach?
We'll talk about later on going to Long Beach and Pass Christian. So I like those areas. But
okay.
I mean, really, let's just say I had a lunch at White Pillar. I can drive 2 miles and just find a secluded area of the beach and chill out there.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention one more restaurant in downtown Biloxi. It's called Mary Mahoney's. That's the classic. That's if you're in Los Angeles, you have to go to Canner's Deli. So Mary Mahoney's is the classic old school place to go to in Biloxi. And I have to be honest, I only ate lunch there one time and got their lunch menu, had shrimp and grits. But the setting is phenomenal. This old world French, like pre-colonial building. And I think it's authentic. Don't think it's contrived like Epcot. And they have these gigantic oaks that are around the property. So if nothing else, go there, check out the scenery, whether you eat there or not.
All right. Excellent. Where to next?
Keep driving along. I think actually Gulfport is next, and that's the largest city that's along there, and they have the largest port. They're trying to get Carnival Cruise to stop there. So right now it's a commercial port. I believe most of the like bananas and things that come into the southeastern United States come through Gulfport. It's a nice place to stop. The Mississippi Aquarium is opening. The State Aquarium is opening up later this year. I remember getting a press release. I believe they said April 30th.
Okay.
I got to tour the pre-construction, and it's a nice site and everything. So I know they're looking forward to that. It's going to be the largest aquarium between, I think they said, Dallas and Orlando.
Okay.
So that's going to be really great for their tourism. There's an area of Gulfport that I love that's called Fishbone Alley.
Okay.
So that would be, I was going to make another Key West analogy, like an alley that's off of Mallory Square. It's not the main drag, but it's an alley off of that, but it's super cool. And there's nightclubs and nice restaurants and controlled graffiti. You can find your mainstream restaurants, a lot of chain hotels and so forth. A lot of people will like to stay there and visit there. My personal travel style is not going to chain restaurants and hotels, so that's why I'm concentrating on some other things. But there's nothing wrong with staying in your Hilton Garden Inn or things like that. It's just I choose not to.
Got it. Continue on. Where are we going to?
Yeah, you continue on from there, and then Long Beach is next. Not a lot of commercial activity. There's a few restaurants there, and they have a harbor, and so you can go there and go fishing. But I think for the tourists, you're going to Ocean Springs, you're going to Biloxi. You continue on through Gulfport. You kind of skip Long Beach. Beautiful beaches. You head on Pass Christian is the next little town. And then beyond that, you're going to Bay St. Louis, and that's the end of coastal Mississippi. So there are a couple of places that I like in Pass Christian that we can talk about. But I think building an itinerary, I would probably say, stay in Pascagoula for a night, Ocean Springs for a couple of nights, Biloxi if that's your cup of tea, and then go on to Bay St. Louis.
Okay. You say you want to mention a couple things in Pass Christian before we get to...
Yeah, there's a phenomenal restaurant I went there called Whiskey Prime. Yeah, one of the best fillets I've ever had in my life. I try and get shrimp and grits everywhere I go on the coast and fresh oysters that they pluck out that same day. But someone said, you got to get a steak there. And I did. And it was just a phenomenal steak. Now, their oysters were also great. So I like that place called Whiskey Prime. Fat Sumo's is another place there. And it's a sushi place.
Okay. And
I didn't know about it. And that's one of the things that I learned about when I talked to all the chefs and the culinary experts. And I'm like, what other places do you like to go to? Well, I'm really diving in and saying, come on, give me some local hidden gems. And they were like, oh, well, there's this place called Fat Sumo's in Pass Christian. And so I went, it was phenomenal. So apparently there's an offshoot of, I think it's in Jackson, Mississippi is where the original one is. And so that chef opened up a satellite location in Pass Christian, and it's a phenomenal sushi place. Robin Robert, the woman from Good Morning America, she has ties to the area, and her sister has a shop in Pass Christian. So I know a lot of people like to visit specifically to go shopping at that place. And Robin Roberts comes at least once a year. I know she was there in December, right before the Christmas season. And so I know that was a big to-do on social media.
And then you wanted to get to end us in Bay St. Louis.
Bay St. Louis. So to me, the bookends of coastal Mississippi are Ocean Springs and Bay St. Louis. Those are, for lack of a better term, the cool towns. They're both little artsy communities and villages. People are very creative and friendly. You can go past Bay St. Louis another few miles, and you can go past Ocean Springs to Pascagoula. And, it's well worth exploring the whole coastline, which I think is 68 miles. But Bay St. Louis is a pretty cool town, and it's where we should go next.
And what are we going to do in Bay St. Louis?
Bay St. Louis, a lot smaller than Ocean Springs, so I would probably recommend spending maybe a night there. The first time I stayed there, I stayed at a place called Baytown Inn. Very, very cute B&B, and it's right across the street from the water. I think it has 12 rooms, and the rooms, they have sea life theme. I stayed in the flamingo room one time, and then the next time I went there, I think I stayed in the dolphin room. Dolphins, starfish, mermaid room, and then everything in the room is decorated with that theme. But then talking to the manager one time, she said she actually worked for New Orleans tourism for 25 years or so. And she said, I wanted to settle in Bay St. Louis because this is where the New Orleans people would go on vacation.
Huh.
Damn, that's a good quote. That's where New Orleans people go on vacation. So it really made me appreciate Bay St. Louis. So I'm sure, Chris, you've been to New Orleans, right?
I have indeed. Only once.
So there's no beach there. So when people from New Orleans want to go to the beach, Bay St. Louis is the closest beach. So it's about 45 to an hour and a half away, depending on how fast you drive and which route you take.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful sugar sand beach, so I can see why people like it there. I was there in October, and I had to stop at a place called Creole Creamery. It's just something I read about. And I'd been to Bay St. Louis, I don't know, 4 or 5 times, and every time I went, that ice cream place was closed, and I love ice cream. So I learned that that's an offshoot of a New Orleans ice cream place. So there are things like that where something from New Orleans is popular, and then they'll open it up in Bay St. Louis. So it's got that vibe that it's a little New Orleans-y, but it's a lot coastal Mississippi.
Got it. It sounds like more of a place for strolling around rather than specific landmarks that we want to see.
Like in Ocean Springs, I said, stay there for a couple of nights. You got attractions. You have nice restaurants.
We haven't mentioned attractions yet, so that's why.
The attractions, maybe not so much.
Okay.
It's a place to go and chill out. Bay St. Louis is right on their bay, which I think is called St. Louis Bay. Mm-hmm. And then there's a bridge that goes over to Henderson Point, which is part of Pass Christian. I think that's a 2.5 mile bridge, and I walked that last time I was there. So you could do things like that. It's a relaxing thing. You can walk the bridge. There's a casino or two that are there in Bay St. Louis. They have a festival in January. Oh, I think actually it's the second Saturday. But the one coming up is a Dolly Parton themed festival. So there will be people coming from all over Mississippi and the United States that are dressed up as Dolly Parton.
Right then.
They had a Frida festival, I think, in November. So they do things like, it's not your Mardi Gras that you're going to get in New Orleans, but it's quirky and fun and authentic.
As we start to wrap this up, I want to get to some of our wrap-up questions. Let's start with, you're standing in the prettiest spot in the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
That's a great question. So I just mentioned walking across the bridge from Bay St. Louis to Henderson Point. That's this hidden gem that I discovered one day driving around. You go out to the beach at Henderson Point, phenomenal sunsets.
Okay.
It's a relatively empty beach. There are scattered houses forth, but I've been there 2 or 3 times for sunset, and I've seen less than a handful of people.
Well, the other question I have for this area, you mentioned someplace being cool. You meant the vibe was cool, not the temperature was cool. When are we going to go for the best weather?
It is Mississippi, so it's going to be warm and humid in the summertime, but it's the ocean, so you're going to get the breezes. I hate to be one of those people that say any time is great. They'll have some coolish winters, but it will not be as cool as inland.
Right. Do you have a favorite season there personally?
The best times to be there are when it's 75 to 85 degrees. When can you predict that?
Do you have a favorite time that you like to be in the Gulf Coast?
I've been there the first week of June, and I'm sweating my ass off, and I love that. So personally, I love it when it's 90 degrees.
Okay.
And then if you're driving on I-10 between Mobile and New Orleans, you may think this is so stifling, obnoxious to hell, but then you could drive 5 miles south and you could be on the beach. And I think that's what most people miss, that you think you're on this asphalt concrete jungle, and you are, but you could take the time to take the coastal route, and it's phenomenally different.
Okay.
A lot of the United States is like that. If you drive an I-95 through Florida, go a few miles to the east and you're on A1A going up the coast. But this area is so well traveled between Mobile and New Orleans on I-10, people don't take the time to go a little bit down there to coastal Mississippi. And they rebranded themselves last year to call themselves the Secret Coast. So they're trying to draw more people down there, but it really is a secret, and I really love it.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in coastal Mississippi.
They love their shrimp. They are shrimp crazy there.
And our guest again has been Charles McCool from McCoolTravel.com. And Charles, if we wanted to send people to your best post on coastal Mississippi, where are we sending them?
I do have a few articles on McCool Travel, but one is called 51 Plus Coastal Mississippi Hidden Gems on the Secret Coast.
All right.
And I have at least 75 hidden gems now, but I called it 51 Plus because I'm continually updating it. But that is one of my favorite articles that lists just tons of things to do there that even the locals don't know about.
Excellent. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And Charles, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for coastal Mississippi.
Thank you so much, Chris.
This show has gone a little long, and so I'm not going to do a lot of announcements and news of the community, but I did want to say two things. One is we're going to start the voting where the Amateur Traveler trip will be in 2021. So join the Facebook group, amateurtraveler.com/trips, to have a say in that. And then also we do have Patreon will be coming, and I'm hoping to launch that here within the next month, where there will be Patreon that will help you support the show, and there will be some bonuses available to people who subscribe to that. And check that out in the Facebook community, amateurtraveler.com/Facebook, or go to the website and join the mailing list. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.
I got to see one more cathedral. I got to sit in one more cafe.